Hello, Bahman. Am I audible?
Yes, a little bit loud would be great.
Yeah, fine. So, welcome to the 25th edition of International Film Festival of Kerala.
Thank
Uh,
you.
it's a wonderful film, The Names of the Flowers, which is part of the competition section of IFFK this year. This year, due to this COVID situation, we are not able to actually physically meet and celebrate the festival. But I think uh, we have to resort to these online means to communicate with each other. But very glad that this film is part of IFFK foreign because Che Guevara is actually a legend all over the world, and he is actually iconized, mythologized in Kerala too. Like he appears in various forms and he's part of political protest movements and all that. So a film about him is it rouses a lot of interest. A lot of people really love to see this film. So this film is actually very interesting kind of film, and this film is kind of about uh, the stuff legends and myths are made of in a way, like how myths are made, how legends are made of. Looked at that way, it is a kind of universal kind of story uh, about history and memory and the ways in which individuals, societies, and states remember, historicize, mythologize, and memorialize. This film is about a phenomenon called memory and history, and how certain memories become history and others are excluded or disallowed or banned or kept away. So about again about how personal memories and public histories are meshed, woven together, woven into each other. So I just found this film very fascinating. The way how a person's memory becomes part of history, where she views herself into the web of history, as it were. So a very enigmatic kind of a story and a very magical way in which the narrative is picturized through these vast, desolate landscapes, the daily journey of Julia, the old woman, and the mentally challenged man who accompanies her adamant and persistent efforts to relive and assert her memory and all that. Again, it's a kind of, this is as I said, there's a conflict between official history and the memories of people. The film could be read like that. So I would start off with this question. Is it actually based on a real life story?
Great introduction. Sure. Yes, it is based on. That's how I came across the story in the first place because it is based on. I mean, the character, so to speak, of the protagonist of the film is based on an individual named Julia Cortez, who is a retired teacher living in a Bolivian village, in the village where Che Guevara was killed. And well, she exactly of making him a soup, hours before his death and having almost the last conversations of his life, with her and so on. Well, naturally, there are a great deal of dramatic, basically information and layers that are added to the character and to the story. But the main idea, if you may, comes directly from Julia Cortez. That's right. Sorry, I can't hear you. Uh, excuse me.
Sorry, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. What was the kind of inspiration behind the story? Was it your knowledge about this character Julia Cortez, or were you working on this theme otherwise?
Making a film is always meeting of very different aspects and ideas and layers. So on one hand, it might be directly getting to know this person, Julia Cortez, through a piece of article that was published in a newspaper in England. And then on the other hand, I might have had my own ideas, etc. So at the same time, I mean, simultaneously, these few ideas come together, and you decide making a film as such. But in this precise case, I would say, I had certain ideas before of, uh, you know, of basically historical context, where history turns into memory and all those basic introduction that you brought up. And what I basically learned about the story of the death of Che Guevara in Bolivia, I found it a nice context where I could exercise those earlier interests that I had in that precise dramatic context.
In the narrative structure of the film is actually not a linear one. Nothing actually happens. There's a kind of, it doesn't follow a kind of linear narrative format. It tells it is more of a kind of creating through images. You're creating a kind of very dreamy fantasy kind of atmosphere through these long shots of the landscapes, very human faces. The human faces are very important, I thought. The bare interiors, the repetition of Julia's walk to the school with the flowers, the flower pot on the windowsill, and you have constructed your film by using such imageries and creating a kind of different kind of world where memory is more important than reality. Is it so? Like, what was your thought process behind creating this atmosphere?
Every film, I think, finds its language in a very evolutionary way. I mean, especially in the method that I work with this film, many exterior scenes, there are not too many interior scenes, and the environmental context, that whole geography, that whole natural landscapes, and so on. In a way, sometimes the idea dictates itself, you know. And leads you to the right form and language, and it happened to be with this film as well. Naturally, because it wasn't my country, or it wasn't the country where I was introduced to before, you go there with certain ideas, at times with certain illusions, with certain images in mind, but then what I call this process is meeting halfway with reality, with real characters, with real places, and so on. So, filmmaking as such is always meeting halfway with that reality, as I said, and therefore the form and the language of the film is born somewhere in between. You know, there are certain ideas that are yours, certain ideas comes from the environment, and so on. And this goes with everything. It goes with characterization. It goes with the cinematic language, and so on.
As I said, Shea is a legend throughout the world, no? And he has been absorbed and adapted into various cultures and political imaginations in different ways. How
Mhm.
do you actually personally relate to Shea and his legacy? For you, is he more of a legend or a real person who was hunted down and shot dead in that desolate school? How do you actually relate to Shea as a historical person and also Shea as a kind of memory and legend?
It's very interesting, regardless of how your own ideas are about Che Guevara, either you're a pro Che Guevara person or an anti Che Guevara person, and so on. Once you get to Bolivia, you become introduced to a very different context, in a way that Bolivians themselves, they have very mixed feelings about this man. Some, with more sympathy towards left, of course, praise him, and so the government of Bolivia, the government of Evo Morales, praised him for years, and they, created museums of the man in close to the place where he died, and so on. And many other Bolivians who don't have such ideas, they simply find a man more or less, dangerous, rather, no, and a man who came to invade their country politically, and so on. And so there are just so many different Che Guevaras there. And then there is this Che Guevara as a mythological figure, as I mentioned, who is rather worshipped by some locals there. As I mentioned, they saw some biblical image in the man, and so he was elevated to level of this basically religious mythology, and so on. My own tendency was rather not to dictate anything from my own basically perspective, and just be observant and try to learn from these different versions of Che Guevara that I met across the way. And I had few other versions also observed in Cuba as well. It wasn't only Bolivia. It was in Miami, it was in Cuba, it was in Bolivia, and so on. And so the image of Che Guevara that basically is built in the film is rather an outcome of all these different layers of the man and his mythology that I learned about through years. Sorry, I can't hear you again.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. The film is also a kind of, Julia's attempt, a person's, an individual's attempt to make history part of her life. She personalizes a public legend in a way, or inscribing herself into a real event in history. But actually, her efforts are actually aborted or foiled by others and by the state. State has a different kind of version of history and about memory and all that. So, are you actually talking about who owns memory and who writes history, and about how personal memories, feelings, and dreams are lost in the larger history? What is your take on that?
I mean, a film should ideally speak for its own, so I'm not going to add really comment on that. But as I mentioned, look, what I was interested in was this clash of the narratives, as you're putting, right? There is the narrative of the government, and the government has its own purpose for that narrative. You know, they celebrate that figure and his 50th years anniversary of death for certain political agenda and so on. And then there is that tiny individual who happens to be the protagonist of the film, whose name is Julia Cortez, that teacher, and then so on and so on. So basically, every individual or institution around the that name around Che Guevara is being basically benefited in different ways. And this is again, these are ideas coming directly from reality and how things were in Che Guevara. The tourism, that so-called the historical and cultural tourism that was built around the man was at the end of the day very helpful to the villagers, to the storytellers, and there are still thousands of tourists every year going to that village of La Higuera and Bahirande to enter the school where he was shot and to take photos of the laundry room of that hospital where his basically dead body was exhibited and so on. So there is still a sense of Che Guevara tourism. Then there is the government and so on. And I just was interested in the way that these narratives at times they clash each other and so on.
Again, like the image of Che Guevara's, dead body lying on that bench. We actually have it from Fernando Solanas' film, Hour of the Furnaces, where you see when the film ends with the shot of Che Guevara lying dead, shot dead. Is it the same place or where you shot?
Uh, no, something interesting is that Che Guevara was arrested and killed in the province of Santa Cruz, where the whole guerrilla fight was going on and so on. And I shot the film in Bolivian highlands, close to La Paz. So there is a big change of location in the film, and that by itself was a rather difficult decision to make. And at the end of the day, I thought that we have a sense of dramatic permission because it's a fiction film. At the end of the day, it's not a documentary. And then yes, using that dramatic permission, we decided to basically shoot the film in a different environment.
Also, the people who act in the film, are they professional actors or people from the village?
They're all non-actors. There are, I believe, two professional Bolivian actors in the film, Jorge Hidalgo and then Nelson Torres. These two are professional actors, but apart them, everyone basically is non-actors. in a sense that it's their first time being in front of the camera.
And also, you are from Iran, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and I think you live in Canada.
Mhm.
And this film was shot in Bolivia. So, what was the experience like for an Iranian who lives in Canada making a film in Bolivia? What was it like? It would be interesting for our viewers to share your experience of finding the location and get the feel of the landscape and
Not
making the
really
film.
much. I mean, I feel home when I work in a film, regardless of where it is. I feel home because that's the language that we speak, and the film itself and that cinematic language and so on is my main focus. I try not to get distracted by the new environment that I step in, or nor to get to uh, yes, I believe the term would be distracted by ideas and by things that might be at first seeming very interesting or very charming and so on, but at the end of the day might not be coming directly from that film itself. So I try to create a frame for myself, stay focused in the frame, and whatever I found interesting in the environment, try to translate it into that frame at the end of the day. So and in Bolivia also, I felt at home. The people are wonderful, very welcoming, very warm people, and I spent quite a few years there. I got to learn more about the culture and in the environment. And yes, it was a very personally speaking, it was a very good and pleasant experience.
Also the process of how you went about it, like the kind of the narrative structure that you follow, and all the visual imageries that you have in the film. Do you script beforehand and then go to the locations, and you had a script in mind in before you shot the film, or a lot of things happened there, improvised there?
Yes, as I mentioned, look, you always have certain ideas, especially about the place you never been to, right? And then by the time you arrive there, you start, adjusting your ideas to the environment. You start changing ideas and so on. So it's neither this nor that. It's neither an entire act of improvisation nor an entire act of dictation of what I have in mind onto that space. As I mentioned, I'm borrowing this term by the way from Gilles Deleuze, that French, basically philosopher, meeting halfway. Telling stories with that nature, that is neither too personal, is neither entirely from your own personal basically means, nor it's an anthropological imagery entirely. So it's in a way meeting halfway with reality. Your ideas and the reality, they basically complement each other, and this process of filmmaking was applied in Bolivia, this Bolivian film as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because the film, as such, its vagaries and the way it, takes the narrative forward is open in nature, so that the viewers have a lot of space to relate to and think and imagine. That is the way in which the film has been structured, which I think is very fascinating. Uh, it's also your first film, right?
That's my first fiction film, feature fiction film.
Okay, so what is your personal background from? Did you study filmmaking and then?
Well, I started acting as a child actor back in Iran, and then uh, I left the whole acting world, and I was working as a film critic in newspapers for a while, and journals, film journals, and so on. And then I had a few short films made in Iran as well. And then by the time I left Iran for Canada, I tried to basically keep my focus only on one field that happened to be cinema.
And I understand the film has gone around to a lot of festivals. How was it received actually, and how was it received in international festivals?
I mean, generally speaking, I'm very happy with the film with the way that the film was received and the audience liked the film. The film won a couple of audience awards and so on. Very interesting, but I was curious to see how would film work in a few countries like China, for instance, and even in India and so on. And I was surprised by the way that how the Chinese audience, for instance, welcomed the film, or the audience in Brazil and so on. So at the end of the day, there are a few countries where the film just connects apparently stronger with the audience, and that got me really interested. I had that experience, as I mentioned, with Brazil and with China.
Yeah, I think that is very interesting actually, because people relate to Shea in different ways, connected to their own political histories and all that. So,
That's
was
right.
it shot in Bolivia?
Sorry, say it again.
Was it shown in Bolivia?
No, not yet, because of the whole pandemics. We haven't had the chance to have our Bolivian premiere, so hopefully this year.
I'm sure that this film will be loved here. Actually, people will like it because Shea has been in the public imagination and imagery in Kerala in various ways. So I think it'll be loved by people here. So uh,
Excellent. I hope
thank
so.
you for this conversation, and also tell us about your current project. What are you working on now?
Yes, I'm working again on a. uh, as I mentioned, not to you, but earlier here and there, that I was interested in making sort of a trilogy about 20th century and so on. And so this Che Guevara film happened to be a film in that trilogy. I'm working on another film again with a 20th century theme in it, and just in the script writing process right now.
Okay, thank you, Herman, for being with us and also taking part in IFFK. Uh, Looking forward to more films from you, and also uh, maybe next time you'll be in IFFK personally.
I hope so. Thank you very much, and enjoy the film.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that will be enjoyed here and appreciated well. We'll
Excellent.
know about
Excellent.
the comments of people and their response to the film.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.